Night security is a great example of how tension can bring true fear to a player. Not many games can accomplish this because it's not an easy thing to do. There are many steps to creating a perfect formula for having tension in a player, but there aren't very many ways to learn about these crucial steps. As a horror game enthusiast and horror artist, I've always had trouble finding videos that explain the inner workings behind the horror genre, and that's part of why I started this channel, to provide in-depth explanations of horror games and why they work or don't work. And that's why today we're going to take a look at the steps needed to create suspense and learn how Night Security uses these to create tension in a player. So with that said, if this game piques your interest, I highly suggest playing it before watching this video, because I go through many spoilers. It would also be beneficial to play this game yourself if you're interested in making your own horror games, because in my opinion, this is one of the best uses of tension in a horror game. With that said, let's get right into the office of Night Security. So before we get into the game, we first need to understand the steps that are needed to create tension in a horror game. That way, while we go through Night Security, you'll better understand how these steps form tension within a player. There are usually a total of 5 steps: setup, expectation, the seed of doubt, diversion, and then action. The setup is the background story of the game. It usually involves the player learning and getting comfortable with the environment. This also goes hand in hand with the next step, expectation, which is what the player is expected to do and what the player expects from the game. These two steps are made to allow the player to understand what normal is in a horror game. That way, when we take the rug from under the player, they will know this is something out of the norm and off, which brings us to step 3, planting the seed of doubt. Now, this part is crucial and is the turning point for every horror game. This is when you introduce something off that is not seen as normal. It can be small things like lights flickering, random creepy noises, or it can be big events like having blood on the floor or spotting a monster within your gaze. It's usually best if you start with the small things first and slowly crank it up to bigger events to farther drive tension within a player. And this is when you get to step 4, diversion. And here is when it gets interesting. Now that you have the player all riled up, you're going to set up a scenario where the player feels like they'll get attacked by a monster or get jump scared. But in reality, nothing will actually happen, or it'll be something normal in replace of where the player expects a jump scare. This step is a huge trick on the mind. Players will be bracing themselves and expect something to jump out at them, which will raise their suspense. But when nothing happens, it causes the player to feel relieved for a brief moment, before being tense again because they know deep down that the jump scare will come at some point. When making a horror game, you can use these diversions more than once, but it works the best when you use them sparingly to make it harder for players to know if something will happen or not. And this is when we get to the last step, action, where you finally allow the player to be chased, attacked, or jump scared by the monster in your game. At this point, the player will have an unbearable amount of tension that when you finally jump scare them, it will leave them petrified. But not only does it leave them petrified, but it brings their tension back down, allowing you to continue the cycle of gaining tension and releasing it through the use of these steps. So now that you have a good understanding of what it takes to create tension in a player, let's take a look at Night Security and how Chila's art uses these steps to their full advantage. When you first get into the game, you are instantly being set up. You find yourself in your apartment, and when exploring it, you find that you have a wife and daughter, with your daughter having her 7th birthday coming soon, based on the cake you find in the refrigerator. When you finally exit the apartment, you are given a cutscene of you parking your van, and when walking around, you find out you work at an office building in town. When entering the building, it's normal and you make your way into the security room, and this is where you get a set of tasks to do, which is part of step 2, expectation. When looking at the notes, you're expected to check the fire alarms in the back of the rooms and lock the doors. You are also expected to turn off the lights in the bathrooms, and if people are still present, send them home. You have to do this for all 11 floors in the building. And along with this, you'll find a note from your manager talking about how he's lost contact with the previous security guard, which is why you're taking over his role. So as you can see here, we are instantly given a background story of what's going on, and are still given an expectation of what's seen as normal in this world. You learn about where you live, your family, and where you work. It's done effectively and doesn't overstay its welcome. It's not too long and it's not too short. But something you might have noticed is that the seed of doubt has already been planted within the player. If you didn't catch it, the note the manager left for us talks about the previous security guard has gone missing, which to the player raises questions as to what might have happened to this previous security guard, since this is after all a horror game. It's such a clever way of sliding in that seed of doubt without having it being in your face. It's a tiny detail, but it works, and it's the first building block to raising up the tension. So now that the game has done these 3 steps, it means now it can farther plant that seed of doubt to blossom into what we know as suspense and fear. While you're doing your tasks, you're left in your thoughts as to what might happen. So far everything is normal, but you know something is gonna pop up eventually. The first floor nothing happens, and when you get to the second floor not much else happens either, besides running into someone in the office and in the bathroom. You do however come across a random TV that is on, which is a little odd, but you carry on. When you get to the third floor, you see some random stranger walking out the exit door, but nothing else happens besides running into another oddly placed TV. When going up to the fourth floor, however, weird stuff starts happening. Near the bathroom, there are flickering lights, and when you place them, an entity appears behind the bathroom door. When walking in, the entity is nowhere to be seen, and you are forced to continue doing your task as normal. When you finish the fourth floor and go up to the fifth, things start getting really weird. First thing you notice is that the lights are out and that it's pitch black. When walking out, you're told to get a fuse and turn on the power. While doing this, you come across a menacing red door, and when going into it, you find yourself in a tight corridor maze with the floor filled with blood. This is when the game gets to the fourth step, diversion. During this part of the game, you are forcefully putting yourself into unknown territory that has red herrings everywhere, from the blood-filled floor all the way to the tight corridor hallways. As a player, you have strong feelings that something is going to happen. And it doesn't help that the hallways have right angles when turning left or right, hiding whatever could be on the other side. And if that isn't enough, the game has you backtrack the way you came from, farther driving the tension within the player. It also doesn't help that when heading back, you see the entity's head slowly pop out from the corner of the wall before disappearing. All these elements make the player feel like a jump scare could happen at any point, which prolongs that feeling of suspense. And this is what the majority of the game goes through, a cycle of planting the seed of doubt and diversion. And as you continue on, each floor slowly gets worse and worse, with tons of misdirection sprinkled in each floor. For example, getting to the 7th floor, you find that it's still being worked on, but there are random puppets spread throughout the floor. Now, mind you, there hasn't been one jump scare, just a couple appearances of the entity from a distance. But this silent jump scare was by far the best in the game because it was so unexpected. And since my words won't perfectly describe the scenario, I'm just gonna let it play out. So what you just saw there was another brilliant act of diversion. Until now, the game has made you fear the entity, but when you get to the 7th floor, there are eerie puppets placed about. And when you enter this room, you aren't expecting one of the puppets to be so close up to you, causing a silent jump scare. And something nice about silent jump scares is that they don't allow the player to lose much tension compared to a regular one, because as a player you still know there'll be a loud jump scare to come. So when you experience a silent one, you really aren't given a brief time to relax. Continuing on in the game, you keep going up each floor with horrors worse than the last. And when you finally make it to the 11th floor, you come to realize you're actually going down instead of up, which is not normal in the slightest, causing for more concern and tension. Along with this, the walls, floors, and ceiling become caked in blood, and when the elevator finally stops, this happens. It's one of the most chilling experiences in the game. The elevator slowly opens and makes grinding noises as it does that echoes the dark, empty hallways. The only thing visible within it is an eerie placed TV. You can hear the dampness of this place with droplets landing on the floor, veiling the silence of this horrid place. This is what it means to have great environmental storytelling. It makes you sick to your stomach, feeling the emptiness of the black void, with no clue as to what could be in this old, forgotten floor. This is when you get to the 5th step. Action. After looking down the dark hallway, you are forced to walk up to the TV and watch it. Each scene on the TV is empty and dark, with you waiting for something to happen. And you think to yourself, is this it? Will this be the moment when something comes after me? Has all of this built up to here? Will I be released of this maddening tension? When the TV stops, you get your answer, with the entity quickly jumping out from behind the TV, startling you. but just as quickly as it appears, it disappears. And after this event, the hallway turns on and you enter the normal floor layouts from previous floors, except it looks like you went straight to hell. After solving the puzzle and watching the fixed TV, you are told to exit the floor. You decide to make your way out, but when you open the door, a ghastly entity shows up in front of you, charging towards you. And this is when you experience the peak of Step 5. You desperately try to escape this horrid thing, making these grudge-like noises echoing the halls. When you try escaping, you are given 2 endings, one by going to the stair exit, and 2 going to the elevator. Ultimately, both land you with a bad ending. And this right here was the final step to building up tension and releasing it. So as you can see, this game is one of the best examples of how effective tension can be. Tension in a horror game is so powerful, it's more terrifying than the actual jump scare, because while the player is waiting to get scared, they are thinking of something far worse than what the game could ever have to offer, because nothing is more terrifying than the monsters inside your own mind. That is why having all these 5 steps in a horror game are crucial to creating an intense experience and making a lasting impact on a player. Overall, I hope this information helps you better understand the inner workings of horror games, and if you are a developer, I hope this helps you understand what creates a tense horror game, because there aren't that many places to learn this from. With that said, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on more videos like this. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on what you consider a suspenseful horror game. With that said, see you next time.